Let's break down Mama Don't Cry by Robo. So I've used a very bright, punchy, snappy kick over here. Then we have a snare, which is an open snare. It has a tom kind of a sound to it. Then we have two rim shots. One is dark, one is bright, to bring a more groovy texture to the Afrobeat sound that we are using. Then I've used a percussion layer over the drums. So we created a percussion layer using 2-3 kinds of shakers and claps and a slightly different snare. So this is the sound. So you can hear snaps, claps, and a lot of shaker sound in this, and everything together, the whole drums sound like that. And on the drum bus, I'm using a transient designer to just slightly increase the attack of the subs. Let's move on to the bass line. The bass is actually a bass pad that I've created using Alchemy. So I've tweaked the ADSR envelope of the bass pad such that when the tail of the kick ends, then the bass comes up. So you heard how slowly it comes up. So there are two kinds of bass pads that I'm using here. So one is when the drums aren't very prominent, and one is when the kick is very punchy. So when the kick is punchy, I wanted to duck the bass pad so that they don't clash. So I'm using a Step FX plugin by Logic, and whenever the kick hits, it ducks. So I'm cutting a little bit of highs on the bass so that it doesn't clutter up the other elements of the mix. Then I'm boosting a little bit of low mids over here to bring the bass up front and make it sound bigger. And we have a slight reverb on the bass, then a little bit of saturation. And yes, and the Alchemy, the settings of both the bass pads are almost the same. So the next thing is synth pads. I have two synth pads over here. Again, one synth pad is being used when the drums are not as much prominent and when the kick and the drums overall are very punchy. So this helps me tweak both of them differently. So in the second pad, I'm using the same Step FX sidechain medium setting so that whenever the kick hits, the synth pad ducks. Usually I use a sidechain compression or sidechain dynamic EQ just to duck the bass or the other instruments when the kick hits. But for this song, I'm using the Step FX style of ducking. So the synth pad sounds something like that. So synth pad along with the bass pad, they sound like this together. So the synth pad, I'm actually using it like an extension for the bass pad so that both of them sound one big thing instead of two different elements. This is the settings I'm using for the synth. So for impacts, risers, and for drops, I've used some chimes, reverse cymbals, some splashes, and EDM style impacts, very long style impacts, and all of them clubbed together in a reverb going out the outboard gear, and then I've printed them back in just to get a bit more glue. So it sounds something like this. So along with the drums, it's creating this impact. So this was the basic production of the song. So I sent it to Romeo and he had a few more ideas. So we sat together, we recorded some live instruments to it. We added a little bit of sub kick that we typically use with Romeo's songs, and the highs have been cut totally. This is basically supplementing the main kick, giving it more power, punch, and the tightness is better along with it. So it sounds something like that. It's barely audible, but it's helping the kick. Let's hear it with and without. It's very little difference, but it helps the groove. Alright, so next we added some congas to the song. We played them live. So I'm spreading out the congas using a spreader plugin from Logic, and this is actually pushing the hits of the congas to the side of the image, and it's not clashing with the percussion now. Next, we are cutting some lows from the congas as I don't need the low frequencies of the congas in this song. I'm ducking some mids and a slight plate on the congas just to push it back in the mix a little bit more. Then these very cool Timbale rolls that I've produced here. So on these, I'm using a multi-band transient designer just to bring up the attack of certain frequencies and reducing the sustain so the room is less, the tails are shorter, and it creates a more snappy sound. So without the transient designer, it sounds like that. With it, it comes out of the speakers a little bit more when I add the transient designer. Then we have sub-toms. So on this also, I'm using a transient designer just to bring up the attack of the sub-frequencies. Instead of using an EQ, I prefer using transient designers mostly on percussion instruments to tweak them according to the song, the rhythm and the tempo of the song. Then we have live bass in the last section of the song, the outro and the chorus. It sounds something like that. So the bass line has been recorded using Fractal's AxeFX, and we did all the processing inside AxeFX itself. So I'm not EQing or doing anything else here. Also, I used a DBX 160 while recording the bass line after the AxeFX to control a little bit of dynamics before entering the project. Then we have some live guitars on the song. I'm cutting some lows on the guitars, and these also are recorded using Fractal's AxeFX. Romeo insisted that we should use some kind of chaka chaka, that kind of guitar sound in the sections where we need to boost the overall depth of the song, and the frequencies should be more wider. So I'm cutting a bit of lows here. Then I've added some plate reverb on the guitar just to give it an even bigger room and a little more depth. Sounds like that. Without the reverb. So on all the sections, the guitar parts are very different. These are some fillers we added. Then for the last outro, the last hook of the song, there are two layers of guitars. And the second layer, I've cut the lows a little bit more, and the reverb is also slightly different. So two different layers there just to make the song a little bit more lively and busy. And on the rap part, the lows and highs have been cut, but the punchiness a little bit more. So I insisted Romeo to add a little bit of more punchy and choppy kind of guitars for my rap part here. So I'm using a spreader here just to spread out the guitars a little bit more and to create a double take kind of a sound. Then again, plate reverb. So if you want to hear the guitar without the spreader, with the spreader. So there's a bit of movement after I've added the spreader. This creates a bit more live feel to the song. So now let's talk about the main thing of the song, the vocals. So I didn't just produce this song, I wrote it, I composed it. So I'm a bit attached to the lyrics and the composition aspect of the song.
The Kinjis come on, from king to the world.
So to get this sound, we balanced the chest voice to get some tenor and the head voice for the breath and a little mixed false and belting tone in the throughout the song. It wasn't a challenge at all, but to get to that point, it roughly took maybe about an hour to get to this kind of sound. Then it was a breeze. Then the recording was very easy. So all the vocals in this song have been recorded using very high quality preamps by Cranborn, and I used a little bit of thump mojo on it. I didn't cut the lows, I just slightly EQ'd on the way in, and then I used a tube compressor to level out some dynamics, and then we printed the vocals. I went with this approach because I already had that sound that I wanted in my head, and it was very easy to mix the song afterwards. So on the vocals, we have a de-esser. We're just starting off with a de-esser just to tame some of the harshness and some sibilant sounds. Then I'm cutting some lows, some highs. I'm boosting a little bit of low mids, and I'm cutting also at the same time some nasal frequencies. Then I'm using an exciter just to bring back the highs that we cut. A slightly Pultec style EQ technique, but without actually using a Pultec. So next in line is the UAD 1176. This is doing most of the heavy lifting of the vocals, but just slightly taming off the peaks. We actually recorded using compressors, so I didn't want to crush the vocals more. And I have the analog hardware versions of these compressors, but I didn't want the vocals to go out and back in. This would color the vocals even more, as I'm using mix bus and mastering compressors afterwards. Then we have a stereo delay on the vocals, just slightly like 12% to give it more width and increases the tails of the vocals a little bit more. Then I'm cutting off some lows here. Again, I'm cutting off some highs and boosting the mids. A little bit of plate reverb goes a long way. We recorded the vocals very close to the mic, so I've used a plate reverb just to send the vocals a little back, just 8.8% here. Then I'm using two Oxford inflators in series. The first one is boosting the lows, low mids of the vocals and bringing them more upfront and making them sound bigger. And the second one is boosting the high mids. Then again, to top it off, I'm using a de-esser on the vocals in the end of the chain. So the main hall reverb I'm using for the vocals is the Valhalla's Vintage Verb. And I'm cutting the lows and highs again to clear up the mud. Then a little bit of saturation, just a tiny bit, to give the reverb more ambience, more harmonics, which actually helps to separate the lead vocals from the reverb. It EQs it in a certain way, and a little bit of compression after the reverb to avoid the ducking sound, to avoid some pumping sound. But naturally it goes back when the lead vocal, the dry vocals are there, and just as the dry vocals disappear, the reverb comes in. Next, we have another Oxford inflator in parallel. This is boosting the highs of the song, and I have it just a tiny bit. Okay, next we have halftime delay. Lows and highs have been cut. Then again a sidechain compression after the delay to only bring it up when the vocals disappear, and a little bit of plate on the delay to make it more wet and give it another room, another dimension. And the delay only comes up when the vocals disappear, so it just fills up the empty spaces and gives the vocal a little bit of tail. The next is a chorus plugin with the vocal backups preset. This creates double takes kind of a sound for the vocal and make them sound bigger, more wider. And it actually helps the vocals to come in front of the mix without actually coming in front of the mix. So all the frequencies of the vocals multiply using chorus plugin, and there's no phase issues. Then again a plate on the chorus. Then there's pitch shifter, which is creating 1 octave higher harmonies in the left and right channels. The cents I've reduced -5 in the left and +5 in the right to create more stereo depth. Lows and highs have been cut, and a little bit of reverb on the high harmonies. Then another pitch shifter is for the lows. In the left and right channel is different, -12 semitones. It's very excessive EQ on this, and a little bit of plate on it again just to push it back in the mix. Then we have a transient designer in parallel for the vocals. So what this is doing is just increasing the highs and a little bit of mids and ducking the lows a little bit to support the vocals and not change the actual original sound of the vocals. It is just increasing the brightness of the vocals and putting it forward so that the vocals translate better on small speakers. For Romeo's vocals, I wanted a very intimate texture. I wanted every lyric to hit the soul and heart of the listener, since this is a very emotional song and it needs to motivate the listener.
On prie encore pour les jours meilleurs.
So you can hear how we are using power of the chest, but at the same time we are making the tail softer. So this creates an immediacy in the vocals, but at the same time it's intimate.
Nuit sans sommeil, je fais mes plans.
So the double takes have a little bit different sound, and the energy is even more, but the volume of the double takes is very less. So with the lead vocals it sounds like this,
Nuit sans sommeil, je fais mes plans.
and without the double take the lead vocal sounds like that.
Nuit sans sommeil, je fais mes plans.
So we thought it was a very important thing for the song to have some sections where the intensity is a bit more on the lead vocals. Double takes really help for that. So then we are using a call and response kind of layering in which the lead vocals come in, then a crowd voice comes in. And since it's a multilingual song, it's English and French, so we wanted to separate them a little bit. So what we did was we layered some different harmonies and different kind of vocal texture to create a crowd kind of sound. Not too much, but just a little bit.
Hey, we are here. From king to the world. Yeah, tous alliés à wow. Hey, we are here. On est there.
Very similar processing on this. Okay, the lows and highs have been cut a little bit more, and see, and the plate is a little bit more. It creates a bigger vibe, but it's actually far from the mix, and it's just behind the lead vocals since I cut the lows and highs. So it sounds behind the vocals. So we call Romeo the harmony king, and this is why. You can see so many layers of harmonies. Can you hear that? It's crazy. Harmonies of the lows. So it's almost all the notes of the scale, man. It's crazy. So let's break down the harmony section. Let's reveal his secret. And on some parts, you can hear it like that. And my favorite harmonies. And you can notice I didn't clean up the breaths, I didn't clean up anything in this song as such. I just wanted a very, very lively kind of sound, 99.9% of the time, almost all songs, I just clean up the breaths and the noise in these harmony layers or the double take layer. But in this song, when I cleaned it, it just didn't sound right to me. I just couldn't really feel the song then. So the female vocals, they were recorded using a very similar chain, the same preamps, but I used a little bit more thump on the preamps just to bring up more low mids of this vocals, since female vocals don't have a lot of lows, and compression settings were almost same. I wasn't getting a lot of compression there, maybe around 4 to 5 dBs, and a little bit of EQ on the vein. The EQ was very similar, and in the EQ, just boosting some 25k.
I left off for the golden dream. We still pray for better days, even in the darkness. We keep the faith.
And some layers for the hook.
Oh, na, na. Oh, na, na. Oh, na, na.
Really brings some more color to the already amazing lead vocals. Next up is the rap vocals, and the rap vocals sound something like this.
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow. Had pain in my chest, had dreams in my pocket. Now I turn every struggle into profit, can't stop it. No reason for the soul, yeah, I move like a king. Heavy is the crown, but I carry the thing. From the mud to...
So there are many layers in the rap vocals. It might sound like one vocal in the song, but there are many layers. I'll just dissect it now. This one is the lead vocal.
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow. Had pain.
Then we have 3 double takes of the vocals. One in center, 2 panned left and right, hard left and right.
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow.
And the double takes sound a little different. I recorded it very differently so that they don't clash with the main sound.
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow.
So on the double take, what I did was I accented some words on the downbeats of the track, and it creates a bit more groove.
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow. Had pain in my chest.
Then we have doubles here just to hype up certain words.
Flow now. Flow hat.
Then I added some high harmony to the rap.
Came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. Now I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow, had pain.
So with the lead vocals, it sounds something like that.
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow. Had pain in my chest, had dreams in my pocket. Now I turn every struggle into profit. Can't stop it, no reason for the soul, yeah, I move like a king.
So this harmony helped the lead vocals get more color, more brightness. It made the vocals more powerful and more cheerful, motivational, inspirational, and all those adjectives that high harmonies give. And then we have a little bit more harmonies here.
Move like a king, carry the thing. Cry when I speak, lost when we deep.
Let's break down these harmonies.
Move like a king.
A lot of reverb on these harmonies because the lead vocal is drier, and these harmonies give the lead vocals a little bit more tail, and the room gets bigger only on these words.
Move like a king. Move like a king.
This hasn't been made using software. Everything has been sung from here, all the vocals.
No,
So the processing on the lead vocals of the rap is very similar. The chain is very similar, but all the frequencies are different. So it start off with DSO, very similar setting, but the EQ is different. The lows have been cut even more than Romeo's lead vocals. The highs have been cut, and the boost and the cut are very similar, so that the glue is better. Then I'm exciting some highs after 16,800 hertz, and compression settings very similar. Even the rap vocals were recorded using the same chain. The gain stage was a little bit hotter, as I wanted the raps to sound a bit more aggressive and more colorful, so that when the rap section enters, it creates a different world entirely. Basically, the vocals that were going on before the rap are smoother, and just as the rap enters, the highs are increased, the mids are more forward. So the processing was slightly different on the way in of the recording chain. And then my favorite plugin for these kind of vocals, the Alter Boy, man. This gives the color. So without this Alter Boy plugin,
yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm sitting.
and with Alter Boy,
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow. Had pain.
so what this is doing for me is it just, first of all, it's coloring the vocals with a preamp setting that's inbuilt in this plugin. Then it is keeping the pitch more tighter, and then the EQ of this plugin is such that when you put it on any vocal, the vocals jump out of the mix in that mid range, but it stays mellow. Next is plate reverb, just 11%. I recorded the vocals even more closer to the mic, and the angle of the mic was like that. So I was singing softly just to get more throat from the vocals. So a little bit more mix settings on the plate reverb than the lead vocal, Romeo's vocals. Then we have two inflators in series, very different settings, very slightly increasing the lows and slightly increasing the mids. I'm using the clip function on both of the inflators to get more vintage roundness. Usually I don't use this feature, but for these vocals I really liked it. Then I'm using a multiband compression just to tame certain dynamics and make it a bit more tighter sound. So without this,
Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow. Had pain. Yeah, came from the bottom where the lights don't glow. And I'm city to city, putting roots in the flow. Had pain.
Then a deesser in the end of the vocal chain, just to slightly tame off the remaining sibilants or harsh frequencies in the 6000 hertz range. How this is helping is it's bringing the drums, the hits of the drums and some guitars and everything forward and ducking those frequencies in the vocals, creating more space in the vocals basically. Then the sense, in the sense, I'm sending it to very similar hall, but the send gain is very less. The settings are same of the reverb. Then stereo delays. Then we are adding a little bit more chorus, plate, and a final magic sauce for the lead vocals. I call it the VCA crisp. So what this is doing is just bringing up all the frequencies of the lost frequencies, basically the weaker frequencies of the vocals forward, but in parallel. So it's not changing the original sound. Then I'm sending all the vocals, the layers, the harmonies, everything to one single bus before hitting the final mix bus stage. So here I'm using a tape machine plugin to just glue all the vocals together. Then we have a limiter to just tame the vocals so that when it hits the analog chain going out, it doesn't create distortion. Then to tip it off, we again have a deesser, but on a very, very subtle setting. And this is just reducing the harshness in the higher mids and the highs. I'm sending all the instruments, the drums, bass, pads, everything to one single bus. Here I'm reducing 3 dBs. I'm sending all the signal very hot. And then this is going out to Wes Audio RIA tube compressor and gluing all of them together and giving a bit more tube harmonics on those just to tame off some highs and creating a little bit more lush sound. And after the RIA, I'm coming back into Logic, and here I'm using a vintage tape to glue all of them even more together. Very subtle setting, excitement for highs so that it fills all the gaps in between the elements. And then I'm just catching the peaks with a vintage limiter for all the instruments before I go out to the analog domain so that it doesn't distort my analog hardware units. Sometimes this distortion is very pleasant, but only for some genres. Then on the mix bus, I'm decreasing 3 dBs again using a gain plugin. I'm sending all the signal very, very hot and utilizing some digital clipping inside of Logic's routing, but not actually clipping the plugins. I like the sound. Sometimes I don't like that sound, but on this song, I really liked it. It gives a little bit of harmonic color to the sound without actually clipping the plugins. So the harshness is not that. Then I'm catching some peaks with a vintage limiter at -3 dB. So again, for the same reason, so it doesn't distort with the hardware gear. The first thing I have in the analog chain for the mix bus is the Teglier Creme RC. This is one of my favorite processors for the mix bus because it has an EQ and a compressor, a Pultec style EQ and an SSL style VCA compressor just to glue the track together and give it that VCA polish. I'm just boosting 0.5 dBs at 40 Hz and 1.5 dB at 10 kilohertz, and this is feeding into the compressor. So it's pushing the compressor even more at these frequencies, and these are shelf EQs. So it creates a smiley curve, but very naturally. And compression is very bare minimum, like 0.5 to 1 dBs at tops. And on the cream setting helps me to level out all the frequencies together and not create a pumping effect. Mostly I use the auto settings, but on this song I didn't want the pumping and compression effect. So this is a very fast and very, very buttery smooth kind of setting, and on 1.5 ratio, which is bare minimum. So it's just keeping the whole song open. So I'm boosting the output of the Teglier a little bit more than I usually do, and this is feeding into the Hyperion EQ by Wes Audio. Here I'm using the mid-side matrix. I've engaged THD in the side channel, and I'm not affecting the mid channel because I've already used all kinds of saturation on the music bus using RIA. Here I've engaged already, and on the vocals I printed the vocals while recording using the RIA. So I already had a very saturated sound built in. So here I'm just saturating the sides. It creates a rounder texture to the side image, and it's very similar to the sound I get from tape saturation, but not exactly the same. But yeah, the excitement and the overall bulkiness, the roundness of the sound is very similar when I use the THD feature. Here I'm just, slightly boosting the 25K. On the sides, I'm boosting even more. On the mids, it's less. 5600 hertz, I'm boosting 1.4 dBs here. The Q is very narrow. And on the sides also, I'm boosting the same. I tried to boost different frequencies on the side in the mid range also, but it didn't sound very, very natural to me because this song particularly, I wanted the whole thing to sound a bit more natural instead of very over polished or pop style. And then I'm cutting just a little bit of 1000 hertz, just minus 0.8 dBs, and very, very narrow curve. And on 200, I'm just boosting 0.08 on the sides to give it more heft. This is because I've cut a lot of lows on the sides till 150 hertz so that my center image, the bass and the subs are very tight. And that's why I boosted some 200 hertz at a very wide Q. I'm decreasing the lows at 117 hertz on both the mid and side because after processing, after doing everything, I had a lot more lows in the song, so I just dipped them a little bit to compensate. Then I'm using a Gullfoss master. This is helping the transients pump a little bit more, and the tame setting is very less in this, and I'm brightening the song at 1% and boosting a little bit of lows on 0.2 dBs. The recover is 4.9%. It's barely minimum, but it's helping the song to cut a little bit more better on different speakers. So after the Gullfoss, we have a very clean signal. Now we need to saturate and increase the depth of the song, and nothing better than the oven plugin inside the box. I'm using saturation fatness preset by Mar. I'm slightly tweaked according to the song and the EQ curve that I needed for this song, and the output is a little bit less. This creates more depth to the song and makes it more wider, more richer sounding, and gives a boost to the RMS level so that it translates better without actually increasing the peaks. Then I'm using Oxford Inflator after all the saturation has been done. Now this I'm using just to bring back a little bit of mids that I've lost doing the smiley curve and all the processing. This is actually giving the tone to the song. So usually engineers would dip the 800, 600 hertz, but I like that frequency range, but of course it depends on the genre, but that frequency range gives a more intimate texture to the song, and it just translates better on a lot of speakers. That mid-range around 700, 800, and the fullness is a little bit more. So I'm slightly just boosting it in parallel using Oxford Inflator and the band split setting, just to avoid any kind of intermodulation, distortion, or any kind of artifacts. So after mixing the song, I slept on it and heard it on different speakers, mobile phones, earphones, and everything. And I came back the next day to master the song, and I used Ozone 12 for this. I used a master rebalance in Ozone itself just to balance off certain elements of the song. I didn't want to touch the main balance of the mix because that was my main perspective and I was very happy with it. So I just slightly tweaked it, like 0.3 dBs in the vocals and etc. Then we have EQ here. again creating even more smiley curve, but in the analog EQ settings, so that just to avoid more transient heavy signal. And I'm dipping a little bit of low mids here. Then I'm using Impact. This is a very cool plugin. It just enhances the groove also. It's not a normal dynamic compressor plugin. It enhances the groove, and it has a mix knob. So I'm just using 50% of it. Then I'm widening the song even more using Imager, but this is also in parallel. I'm just using like 50% of it. The settings are very aggressive, but this is not affecting the original sound of the mix. Then I'm using Clarity. It helps me demask the mids and highs, and it actually helps me translate the song even better on different speakers. Then a stabilizer in the R&B and soul settings, just slightly done, only 25% amount, so that it translates better in a very similar genre playlist. And finally, I'm just dipping the resonant or any offensive frequencies using a dynamic EQ. Low mids, I'm decreasing to 58 Hertz again. Mid range, 800 Hertz. Since we already boosted that range, now I just need to control it a little bit more. And on the mid range, here I was getting some offensive frequencies that are not good for the ears. I just dipping that. Then I'm taming a little bit of high frequencies so that I can boost the overall volume of the song even more. And this is mostly for the big speakers so that it doesn't kill your ears. Then I'm using Maximizer as the final limiter. In the IRC4 modern settings, it helps me boost a lot without actually getting that pumping effect. It's very transparent. It is very transient friendly. I'm boosting 7.6 dBs over here, okay, and without any kind of pumping effect or distortion. The ceiling is minus 0.1, character is 2.8. I adjusted it according to the groove of the song and to avoid a lot of distortion. I'm using the upward compress mode just to bring up the RMS even more. Just a little bit of 2.4 dBs here, a little soft clip in the medium settings, 8%. This is helping me do two things. It is helping me increase the volume of the song overall. It's like increasing the RMS without affecting the peaks, and it's also gluing the song together. I really like soft clips sometimes. So that's it for this song. I hope it helped you connect a bit more to it. And if you have any feedback, comments, if you want to tell me anything, if you have any kind of request, just hit the comment section. Just let me know. I'll be here. Peace.